So how is it halted? Well, despite the myth of the German stormtroopers, the German army is actually fighting pretty badly. They'd rejected what was called bite and hold, where you take a small area and then prepare to move on, and the complex fire plans of the British army, and instead depended on the German infantry to overcome the British by numbers, daring and resolve. Now, the British Army had learnt in 1917 that this led to unnecessarily high losses. It could be done, but the butcher's bill would be higher than necessary. Also, the Germans are desperately short of cavalry to exploit their successes. They had left most of their cavalry out east, amongst the million-strong army that they keep on the Eastern Front to exploit the gains they'd made in Russia. They'd made the Russians hand over vast swathes of land, showing why we must never have allowed the Germans to win the First World War. But they were keeping the cavalry there to exploit their new empire of Eastern Europe. And so the cavalry are pinned in the Eastern Front, not available in the West. It was also very difficult for the Germans to drag the artillery forward to support the advance. It still, however, comes close to disaster for the British and French, however. General Foch, the supreme Allied commander, and of course the senior French general, refused to send French units north to help the British. He gambled that the British army could hold firm. If we hadn't held firm, the war would have been lost. It's a massive gamble. But despite the losses, the British Fifth Army did not collapse. So with the failure of the Germans at the Battle of the Lys to win the war, Ludendorff decides to turn south again attacking towards Amiens and the Sherwood Foresters, but are again bloodily repelled. Now, he would try again on the Aisne, however, and this time the hammer would fall against the French. Now, by bad luck, however, the French troops guarding what was a quiet part of the front were replaced. The French units were taken out of the line and they were replaced by exhausted British units who needed rest from the previous battles. The British took British troops away from the Lys, from the Somme-Arras area, and they put them onto the Aisne so they could have a bit of a breather and a bit of a rest. Again, the Germans didn't know it, but this is now a soft part of the line with exhausted men. And this, by bad luck for the British, good luck for the Germans, is where the Germans decide to launch their next offensive. Now, the British army find, when they take over these French lines along the Aisne, that the French had left the defences in an incredibly bad way. You need to have multiple trench lines, but the French had left only a single defensive trench line. These British units are exhausted and depleted, but are told that they better start digging second and third lines. But the next day, after they arrive, before they have a chance to start their engineering work, the Germans attack on the 27th of May in the Blucher-York battles, as they attack the Sherwood Foresters, who have been already so heavily engaged. The Germans shatter the British lines and then overrun them into the French units that are withdrawing from this sector, pushing the French army back as well. And the German army then reach the Marne and get to within 40 miles of Paris. The French government panics, and a lot of these French government officials flee the city, and the government prepares to evacuate all the great bodies of the state to Bordeaux. But again, however, the attack is stalled by the British, and for the first time American troops are put into the line to attack the flanks of this advancing German army. At Contigny, the US 1st Division launch what is the first American attack of the war. The offensive slows to a halt. But the German army's not finished yet, and on the 9th of June they launch Operation Gneisenau. Now, however, the British know what is coming. They had captured the plans for the Battle of Gneisenau from German prisoners. They knew that the Germans would attack the French army along the River Matz to try and separate the British and French armies. The British hand the warning over to the French, giving them the German plans. Despite these warnings, and despite the fact that they rush reinforcements to the River Matz, reinforcing the French army with this new American army, still the French and American lines are shattered, with the German army advancing 9 miles. On the 11th of June, however, there's a counter-attack launched by massed French tanks clanking across open ground towards the advancing German troops, catching the Germans completely by surprise and halting the offensive. Overall, the German losses had been horrible, and the new ground that they had captured was incredibly vulnerable to counter-attack. The Germans had left their mighty Hindenburg Line, that thick defensive belt that had been 2 years in the making, and were now digging into a series of salients. The Hindenburg Line, where the Germans had started, was a nightmare of concrete and steel, and they had instead advanced out of these incredible defences and were now having to hurriedly dig new trench lines in a series of bulges. Also, the German army's morale is close to collapse. The German soldier was starving due to the British blockade stopping food getting into Germany, and they'd been told that the British and French were struggling too. But as they advanced, they captured British food dumps and saw that the BEF wasn't starving. The German army gave its way to looting and drunkenness on captured British and French supplies. The gains on the map looked impressive, but actually the British had launched some of the greatest defensive battles of the British Army's history. The German army was now exhausted, its morale was low, and its positions fatally exposed. They could no longer win the war. From mid-June to mid-July, there is an uneasy stalemate on the lines as the German army dig in, the British army rest, and 39 American divisions, each American division double the size of a British division, arrive in France. As one last throw of the dice, the Germans launch one last attack on the 15th of July, the Friedenstein, or Peace Offensive. The Germans attack on the Marne, but with the Allied control of the air complete, there is no surprise. To the Germans' horror, the combined British, French, Italian and American forces on the Western Front counterattack, led by massed tanks, and the German army is given a terrible mauling. The German army has now shrunk from 5.1 million men to 4.2 million men in just 6 months. Now, an unbeaten British army would try and break the German army on the Western Front.